Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'm going to do just a quick little video on adding a fuel pressure sensor to an Audi TT using the MAF wiring, the MAF wiring. I have an Audi TT 225 that I've got the Ignitron ECU in. And in most cases, if you have the Ignitron ECU, you're going to go with a MAP sensor instead of the MAF. So the MAF is basically not used, so it's a really good connector to use because it's got all the wiring right there. So here you can see in my tablet view on idle with the fuel pressure sensor in. Basically on the fuel rail pressure side, I'm getting about 3.36 bar of pressure. I did use the standard Bosch 414 sensor, and I got mine off of eBay because I'm in the US, but you can get these from Badger 5 also. They sell this same part number plus the connector plus one of the adapters then to go into a T connection. So this is my MAF basically connector. I removed the strain relief. There is a strain relief on there. You just basically pry open the clips here, remove that, and basically my MAF connector had 5 slots and just 4 wires being used. We're going to use the basically the red and the violet, the green wire, and this black wire, and this blue yellow wire is not going to be used at all. So here I've cut off the connector itself. I decided to cut off the connector and basically splice into the wires. Here's the blue yellow we're not going to use. We're going to use a red wire and the green and the black wire. So basically you have the red purple wire, which is pin 4, the green wire, which was on pin 3, and the black wire, which is on pin 5. These are your corresponding ECU numbers basically. So the ECU pin 53 is going to put out 5 volts to the pressure sensor. It was putting it out onto the MAF at pin 4. Pin 27 is going to be your green wire or your ground for your pressure sensor. And pin 29 from your ECU is going to be connected to the black wire, and it's going to be your signal, basically your signal from the pressure sensor. So the pressure signal on pin 3 is a signal out going back into pin 29 of the Ignitron ECU. So here you can see the wires that were cut. So what I did was I spliced right into the wires themselves, basically soldered them fast, and then used a little heat shrink tubing. I don't like to use the crimps basically because number one, they're large and they're not sealed, and I prefer to seal up the connections and make a solder connection. Here you can see the red one, the black one, and somewhere there is the green one somewhere in here, but it's tied to. So I used the same wire colors just so I could basically match them at the other end and keep track of them. So what I did then was I put them into a split wire loom. This was the original MAF loom right here, and then I added a smaller loom. I'm just using those 3 wires and basically cut the wires to length and the loom to length so that it'll run all the way over to the fuel pressure sensor itself. Alright, so I did again. I used the 414 Bosch sensor. Here you can see it here. It has basically the lower or the actual connection on it does use an M10 by 1 male connection. So what you need is then an adapter. This is an adapter that goes as the female 10 by 1 and then the 1/8 NPT male that will fit into a standard T fitting. So this was the T-fitting that I used basically when I cut the fuel line. I inserted this one in. It's a 5/16 barb with a 1/8 MPT port. All right, so that all fits in together into the fuel rail itself. So here it is all mounted into the fuel rail. So here is the T basically fitting being put into the inlet fuel rail. This is the inlet coming from the fuel pump. Here's the adapter here, and here's the sensor mounted in also. I used the yellow fuel resistant tape to make sure that I had everything all sealed up, and here you can see the fuel rail or the fuel line here also. My fuel line was replaced, and it's a pretty rigid fuel line, so I'm not worried about any additional weight on there, and this thing is so light that it really has no effect at all. So here we are. Here is the sensor back in and the fuel line back in. You can see here is the inlet. This is the overflow here coming from the fuel pressure regulator. This is the inlet. So you want to pick the proper line. Obviously, you want to pick the inlet line coming from right to the fuel rail itself. And here is a closer look right here. You can see again the yellow tape. And here is the adapter and the T, and then the sensor itself. So again, on the sensor, pin 1 is going to be your voltage in, pin 2 is going to be your ground or battery negative, and pin 3 is going to be your signal out. And you can see here the labeling on that. The flat side is going to be pin 3, and that's going to be your signal. The round side or half circular side is going to be pin 1 and your positive 5 volts. Alright, so here is the sensor completely connected up. Again, you can see your 5 volts going into pin 1, your ground into pin 2, and your signal into blue. Now these wires are a different color because I purchased a connector that had wires already on it. So they don't match what I used right from the MAF sensor itself. So I basically just sort of made a crossover chart, so I made sure that I got the right ones. Alright, so I did buy this fuel pressure connector. Unfortunately, it was the wrong connector. I mean, it fit, but the keying was different, unfortunately. I bought it off of eBay. I'm not totally sure what the proper connector is. The connector that I purchased basically said that it would fit this 1993 fuel pressure sensor, and that seems to be a very, very common connector and a very common I'm sorry, the connector part number was a 1993. And it fit a different fuel sensor. I think it was like an 059. It was keyed properly for that, but was not keyed for the 414. So what I did was I removed, you can see the key slot here, this violet or purple. You can actually sort of pry this off a little bit and then pull it out the end. And you can actually pull it out, and what I did was I cut the keying off. I kept most of the side and then the bottom, so it was still sort of intact, and then I slid it back in. You can see it here where there's no keying now, but this part I think does still sort of help hold the pins in, and it keeps everything together. So I didn't remove it completely. I just slid it right back in the same slot here. And then once you have it actually plugged into the sensor, this hole is basically covered up. So it won't come out itself, and it actually locks in place anyway. So not sure what the proper connector is. I know you can get it off of Badger. Badger 5 has the 414 fuel sensor. They also have the proper connector and also the adapter to go from the M10 down to a 1/8 MPT. I'm in the US, so I did not get it from Badger. I got most of my parts off of eBay. So that's a solution. If you can't find the regular connector, it does fit. It does lock in place. So mine's been on for quite a while and has had no issues at all. All right, so once you have it in, you've now got to set up the Ignitron software, basically, so it actually sees the new sensor. So what you want to do is go to your basic settings and click on inputs, and your menu for the inputs will come up. What you want to do is you want to find your analog voltage, your ECU pin 29. This is your ECU pin 29, which is basically the one we were going to use from the MAF sensor. And then what you want to do is change it from unused to fuel rail pressure. So you got your inputs, you reset that, and then what happens is once you set up your fuel rail pressure, you'll notice that there will be a fuel rail. Boy, that's a tough one. I'm not sure why. All right, that will open up under your sensors menu a fuel rail pressure indicator here, and then that's what you're going to open up to put in all your values. So here is under sensors, your fuel rail pressure, your FRP, maybe I should go with, is now in the menu. So once you select that, it'll bring up this chart here, and what you need to do, it'll be of course vacant because it doesn't know. You have to plug in your figures. Now I got all these parameters from Badger 5, and they recommend that you double check all these settings, but it seems to be working for mine just fine as long as you're using that 414 pressure sensor. So what you have to do is you have to plug in your bar figures, this line here, these are all your bar figures, and then your voltage figures, and these came right off the Badger website again, so that this graph knows that if the signal coming out of the fuel rail pressure, the signal is 2.099 volts, that represents 4.50 bar of pressure. Now you also need to put in these figures here. There's a minimum, a maximum, substitute, and then this particular one here, I've seen guys leave this at 0, and that affects the reading, and a lot of times it'll stay the same or won't read at all. But basically, this must not be kept at 0. Ignitron recommends just put it at 0.1, and you should be good. So all these have to be, the validation figures all have to be put in also, right here. All right, so that seems to work for mine. Just don't forget to put in all these figures. Now, if you're using a different fuel pressure sensor than the 414, then you're going to have to either find a data sheet, or maybe it came with a data sheet. You can find your parameters for it and then put in your parameters to match your sensor, or you may have to basically figure it out from using a Mighty Vac and put pressure on the sensor and see what kind of figures you get, and then you can make up your own graph. All right, so these are my results after putting it in. Basically at idle, I'm measuring about 3.3 bar, and after taking it for a drive, I did some logs, and you can see here we have my manifold pressure pretty much at full boost here, or close to full boost. You can see how my fuel rail pressure went up. You can see here I have 5.54 bar now. so that every time I'm boosting or adding pressure, I'm going to have to raise my fuel rail pressure to make sure that it's basically equal to my my pressure regulator, my fuel pressure regulator. So also here's another one here, a little bit longer boost signal here, but at the end of the signal you can see here I had about 287 on the manifold pressure, and here my fuel rail pressure went up to 5.76 bar. So everything appears to be working fine, and it's just another thing that you can do to if you're having issues, you can log that now and see if you're having pressure issues for some reason. So there you go. Hope that helps out. Tried to make it as simple as possible, and I know most guys already know how to do this, but I figured I'd do something real quick. All right, hey, thanks for tuning in. Take it easy.